And the background here is that the Court of Appeal, or Migrationsöverdomstolen in Swedish, is the Supreme Court when it comes to migration issues, and therefore their judgment sets precedents that should be followed by not only Migrationsverket but also the migration court in the four migration courts in Luleå, Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö. And this case is called MIG 2318, or case number, as you see here, and it came December the 13th. And this judgment answered the question, what is required to meet the income requirement for permanent residency that was introduced in July 2021. And the key term here in the regulation is that the income should have what is called in Swedish viss varaktighet, that it should last for some time. But it was unclear what that really meant. This case was about a doctoral candidate at SLU, and the migration court gave the applicant permanent residency based on the employment she had and an expected extension. Migrationsverket appealed and claimed that the income must last for 18 months and that the statement from the university regarding an extension should not be considered. The court, however, said that the income requirement is met if the income lasts for 1 year or more. They also said that it's not necessary that the employment you have when the decision is made will last for 1 year if it's likely that the income will last for longer time. For example, if you have an expectation of that it will be extended. And therefore you must look at the situation in each individual case. They also concluded that the applicant has had an income for quite a long time, and that indicates that it's reasonable to think that you will also in the future have an income. So that's another important aspect, as you all have an income when you are here for research or studies. So how will the new judgment change the situation? The decision sets a precedence for cases not yet concluded, or if you have got a negative decision and you have appealed, but the case is not yet settled in the court. And from now on, employment contract that lasts for 1 year at the time of the decision is made should be enough if the income is high enough, and the requirement for this year is 6,090 crowns per month after you have paid for your housing. If the contract is shorter than 1 year, but it's considered likely that the employment will be extended, that can also be enough. It's important to know that the judgment will not change any decisions retroactively, so you will have to apply again if you have got a negative decision and you are not able to appeal any longer. And I can add that the income requirement here, you only have to cover your own costs. You don't have to be able to show that you can also cover for any family members. So, and how will the judgment change the situation for doctoral candidates and researchers? You must still fulfill all the other requirements, that is 4 years within 7 years. With residence permit for doctoral studies, research, or work. You should have shown good conduct. You should have an intention to stay in Sweden. And later, as I said, we expect also new requirements regarding language and knowledge about the Swedish society. And I learned today that Migrationsverket has updated their guidelines for permanent residency. and you see the number here for that guideline. And that was mentioned when I had a meeting with them before this webinar today. But their web page seems not to be updated, and I have told them about that, and they will look at that, because there they still write that you need an employment for 18 months. But the new guidelines, as far as I can see, they are okay with the new judgment and with what I have said here today. So to continue, as you can apply, only apply for permanent residency when a residence permit is about to run out, or if it may be revoked. There might still be issues regarding timing when you can apply. For example, if you have had residence permit for 4 years as a doctoral candidate, then you can only apply when that is about to run out, and at that time you must be expected to have an income for 1 year, or rather at the time when the Migrationsverket settles your case. If you have had a contract for 2 years, it is now, of course, with the new rules, a lower risk that a long handling time will affect your decision. Before, if you had a contract for 2 years and the handling time was more than 6 months, you might have got a negative decision, but now in this situation, they have up to 1 year to handle your application. So how to handle this situation? If you have a pending application, make sure to refer to this judgment and perhaps also to their new updated statement, and also add any information about your contract and the likelihood that the contract will be extended, or if you are about to get a new employment somewhere. If you have not applied for permanent residency, but only an extension, you may consider to add an application for permanent residency. If you have a pending case and have been waiting for more than 6 months, you can ask them to conclude your case within 4 weeks in that case, and refer to this new judgment. And if you have got negative decision and there is still time to appeal, that is, if it's not more than 3 weeks after you have received the decision, you can appeal. And if you're not able to appeal, you have to send a new application if possible. Then do not forget about long-term residency as a way also to get permanent residency. And long-term residency are rules included in the Swedish legislation through an EU directive. And the requirement here is 5 consecutive years with residence permit or legal stay in Sweden. So here is 5 years and consecutive. So that's the difference from permanent residency. But on the other hand, the income requirement is more tolerant, how to say. Here, you should also have an income or be expected to have an income for a year, and that's nothing new. But here you can also count other income than from your own employment or your own company, and that is unemployment benefits, stipends, or income from a family member. As a holder of long-term residency, you can also easier move and work in most other EU countries. And the good thing here is that if you are granted long-term residency, you will automatically also get permanent residency. And you don't have to meet any other requirements in that case. And then as soon as you get permanent residency, you can also apply for citizenship if you like. And the question here, if this new judgment regarding permanent residency will also affect long-term residency. And that's hard to say, but I think the new judgment also clarifies that you have to make a prediction about the future upcoming income, even if you don't have an employment that lasts for a year or more. As I said, 5 years with consecutive residence permit should be for work, research, doctoral studies, or any other residence permit that can qualify for permanent residency. That could be as a family member to a Swedish citizen, for example. And also time with right of residence. That's if you have, for example, if you're British citizens and you lived here before Brexit, that's one example. But also if you have been a relative to an EU citizen that lives in Sweden. And also it's said that you can count other legal stay. And here there are some discussion about what is that. For example, if you have a gap between permits when you have applied for an extension and you have not got a decision, and there is a gap, there are at least one court decision when that's considered as a legal stay, but Migrationsverket usually do not accept waiting time as a legal stay. So that's something that has to be resolved. The qualification time should here be fulfilled at the time for application. You can stay abroad for up to 6 months at a time and up to 10 months in total during these 5 years. A question is, when must the income requirement be met? As far as I know, Migrationsverket says that they should be met at the time when they take their decision. But it might be an opening to claim that it should be enough if you can fulfill it at the time for application. This is another thing that might have to be resolved in court. And the income, as I said, should last or be predicted to last for at least 1 year. Another good thing with long-term residency is that you can apply for that at any time, also when you have a valid permit, so you don't have to wait until the residence permit is about to run out. A decision should be made within 6 months, although we know that the handling time is longer in many cases. And it's important to remember to also apply for residence permit, another type of residence permit, if you like, if the permit you already have is about to run out before the long-term residency is granted. And that is to make sure that you're allowed to stay in Sweden and also work here while you are waiting for the decision. So you need 2 applications in parallel, which is quite possible in this case. Also, if you're not able to get permanent residency one way or the other, you can stay in Sweden after completed studies if you have an exam, or if you have been a researcher when your time with your research contract has expired, you can apply for residence permit for 1 year to look for a job. And here you must also be able to support yourself during this time, but here the income can come from unemployment insurance. It can also be bank savings and so. And if you get a job, you are allowed to work during this year as well. So then a few words about right of residence. That's for those of you who are citizens in EU or EA countries, or if you are a relative to such a citizen that lives in Sweden. In this case, you don't need work permit or residence permit. Instead, you have right of residence. If you're not yourself such a citizen, you should, however, apply for a residence card to show that you have right of residence. It's important to know that relatives to Swedish citizens may not have right of residence, and that's the reason is that this comes from the rules about free movement within the European Union. So it's only if a Swedish citizen has lived in another EU country and moved to Sweden that you can have right of residence as a relative. Otherwise, you must apply for a residence permit. If you have had right of residence for 5 years, you can apply for permanent right of residence. And in that case, you don't have to fulfill any other requirement than having right of residence for 5 years. And if you have right of residence, you can also apply for citizenship. And then for Nordic citizens, you do not need to bother about anything of this. You can just freely move to any other Nordic country. And you can actually get citizenship in some cases already after 2 years. So what remains to be done in this area? Well, we are still working hard to change the legislation because we think that the new judgment does not solve all problems. And there are also other problems not related to permanent residency that must be solved. And the government has said that an inquiry will be started in order to improve the conditions for doctoral candidates and researchers. But we do not yet know exactly what they will look at there. We have to this work, before this work and in other situations, presented 10 points or 10 solutions that must be, or 10 problems rather, that must be addressed in this process. And we hope that they will be resolved within this inquiry. So, some recommendations. Read the information we have at the web page carefully. Also, it's important to contact Migrationsverket to find out more about your specific situation. And of course, your employer can help here also, as they are not allowed to hire anyone without the right to work in Sweden. And a recommendation is also that if you intend to stay in Sweden, it's a good idea to learn Swedish, as it will be a new requirement for permanent residency and also citizenship. And knowledge in Sweden also increase your chances to find a new employment, especially if you work outside university. So then we will come to the next section, and that's about national registration or folkbokföring. And that's how to get a personal number. And if you are from outside EU, you have the right to register in Sweden if you intend to live here for at least 1 year. A residence permit is required, but it does not have to be valid for at least 1 year if you can show that your intention is to stay for at least a year. So it's in a way similar to what we talked about when we discussed permanent residency. However, nowadays you usually, as a doctoral candidate, you get residence permit for 4 years from the start. So this is not a big problem anymore, as it used to be a few years ago. For EU citizens, you must also intend to live in Sweden for at least 1 year, but you must also have right of residence, which you, of course, usually have. And it's the tax agency, Skatteverket, that makes an assessment about this. And you should be able to support yourself and have a full health insurance, either through the Swedish Social Insurance Agency, Försäkringskassan, or if you're covered by health insurance scheme in another member state. And this is usually not very problematic. But if you are uncertain, you should contact Försäkringskassan and ask them to decide about your insurance status and then register with Skatteverket. So next section is about unemployment insurance and what happens if your employment ends. So first of all, it's important to know that unemployment insurance in Sweden is an optional insurance. It's not mandatory or automatic with your employment or a union membership, apart from a very low basic compensation that you can get also without this membership. But to get a decent compensation, you must make an application for a membership in the unemployment insurance fund. And we recommend Akademikernas A-kassa, that is for academics. And you can become a member as soon as you have worked basically 1 hour or more in Sweden, or also if you have worked in other EU countries. And to get unemployment benefit, once you have been a member for a year, is that you have also the right to work in Sweden, either that you have a work permit or if you have an exception from the requirement to have a work permit. And that's quite usual for those that have worked with universities. For example, if you have had a residence permit for doctoral studies or research and applied for an extension or a permanent residency or so, you also have an exception from the requirement to have a work permit, and therefore you are free to take any job. But you must also fulfill some specific requirements for the unemployment insurance, and that's one is the membership requirement, that you should have been a member in the unemployment insurance fund for at least a year. And the work requirement is that you must have worked for at least 6 months and at least 60 hours per month. The compensation level is about 80% of the average salary you have had the last year. But there is a ceiling, so you cannot get compensation for incomes higher than 33,000 crowns per month for the first 100 days you are unemployed. And after that, the ceiling is lowered to 27,500. So 80% of that is the maximum level. And the compensation period is a total of 300 days, or if you have children under 18, it's 450 days. It's important to know that this is working days, so 300 days corresponds to about 14 months if you are full-time unemployed. If you have had a stipend, for example, a postdoc stipend, the stipend as such will not give you right to unemployment benefits. This is one of many drawbacks with stipends. However, it can be considered as studies and unmissable time. So, for example, if you have had an employment before and then a full-time stipend as postdoc and not more than 5 years, you can get compensation based on the previous employment in Sweden, or if you have before worked within EU or EEA. Now, there are 2 ways to get 80% of your full income and that you don't have to care about the ceiling in the unemployment insurance. And one is the transition agreement, which is a collective agreement that we have signed. And the other one is the income insurance that we have included in the membership. The transition agreement is a collective agreement, as I said. And we have an organization called the Job Security Foundation, or Trygghetsstiftelsen, that deals with this. And you can qualify in 2 different situations. If you have been made redundant, that's usually when you have a permanent employment, but also if a fixed term contract expires. And in that case, when you have had a fixed term contract and you have worked for the same employer, which is the same university, for example, for at least 2 years, you will get support in order to find a new job, but also economical compensation for 44 days if you are unemployed and have had an income that is higher than the ceiling in the unemployment insurance. And our income insurance is included in the membership. The qualification time is 12 months, so 1 year membership in SULF and also in A-kassan. You need both. is required here. The benefit is that you will get 80% of your previous income up to a ceiling that is 80,000 crowns per month in this case. The first 2 days of unemployment, you will not get compensation, and you will also not get compensation from A-kassan as such. Our income insurance covers 150 working days, so about 7 months or so. We also have included some other support, coaching to find a new job, which could be interesting if you will not get support from Trygghetsstiftelsen. You have the possibility as a member to purchase an individual insurance that adds another 150 days. So you will get compensated for 300 days in total in that case. And that additional insurance must also be signed 1 year before the first day you are unemployed. And this, the income insurance needs, you have to apply for that. And if you are also qualified for support from Trygghetsstiftelsen for 44 days, you will be able to receive extra compensation for 194 days in total. So the 44 days plus the 150 days included in our membership will be covered. And if you have the additional insurance, you will be covered even longer. So here's an example of the value of the income insurance. If you have had an average salary of 40,000 crowns before tax, before you get unemployed, then the salary you have received will correspond to about 30,000 crowns after tax. If you get unemployed, A-kassan will cover 80% of 33,000 as most. So the income insurance will cover up to 80% of the previous salary, which in this example corresponds to about 8,000 crowns per month. And after day 100, when the ceiling is lowered, you will still receive in total the same amount in total, but more will come from the income insurance and less will come from A-kassan. And then if you have added the additional insurance, you will receive compensation also up to 300 days in total. And the reason why you get less after 200 days is that the compensation level is then reduced from 80% to 70%. And that follows legislation. So now I will say a few words about pensions. We have 3 types of pension in Sweden, you might say. The first one is the national pension based on legislation, and that's handled by Pensionsmyndigheten. And that's something you earn when you work here and pay taxes. On top of that, we have the occupational pension based on collective agreement. And that's handled or administrated by Statens tjänstepensionsverk, SPV. And then you might, of course, have your private pension savings on top of that. And you earn pension rights, as I said, when you are employed in Sweden and pay taxes, and it's your salary that is the basis for the pension. So if you are not employed, for example, if you have a stipend, you will not receive any pension. But to get the pension, when you retire, you have to send an application to, and that's because we don't have any fixed pension age when you have to retire. There is only a lowest age when you can receive pension. And that is today 63 years, and it will become 64 years from 2026. And then the membership fees in SULF for this year is that is 275 crowns per month, including the income insurance. If you're a doctor candidate with employment, you pay 125. If you have a stipend, you pay less. We also offer double memberships with most other unions within SACO. So, for example, SULF and Naturvetarna, the union for scientists, is 289 crowns for 2 memberships, or 145 if you are a doctoral candidate. And that will give you two full memberships, so to say. So you can use all the benefits from both unions. Right now, we have a campaign. So doctoral candidates that applies for membership January to March this year will get a free membership for 3 months. And you can read more about that at our webpage. And remember that membership in unemployment fund is separate from the SULF membership, so you have to apply separately for a membership in Akademikernas A-kassa. Then we also have some optional insurances. Unemployment insurance is one of them, but highly recommended. Then you can apply for the additional income insurance that I mentioned, that will cover more or longer time than the income insurance included in the membership. We offer also, through a cooperation with the insurance company Trygg-Hansa, you can have a discount of your home insurance, but also cars and other things. And with in cooperation with another insurance company, Folksam, you can get access to insurance for accidents. You can sign child insurance, health insurance, and life insurance. And by using these discounts, you can quite easily save the membership fee or most of the membership fee compared to what you pay if you sign without a membership. And this is how it looks. If you go to our page at Folksam, you can type your personal number there and see how much you have to pay for these insurances. As a new member, you will get these insurances that you see here for free for 3 months. Life insurance, sickness, health insurance, accident, and medical insurance, medical care insurance. So during these 3 months, you will have them for free, and then you can decide if you want to keep them or not, or keep some of them, or also extend them. Then there are 2 insurances, as I said, included in the membership. One is the income insurance that we have talked about, and also we have included a membership health insurance. If you have an employment and your ability to work has not been reduced due to sickness for the last 90 days. And this insurance covers preventive health care, incapacity for work, and also when caring for close relatives or seriously ill child. And if you get sick, for example, yourself, this will cover for 2 months after the first 3 months you have been on sick leave. So if you have been sick more than 3 months, you will get money from this insurance, and it's included in the membership. And you can read more through this link here. And finally, before we start with the questions, I want to mention that we have upcoming webinars. And this year we'll have a number of webinars about various topics, and they will be in Swedish or in English. And you can find more information in our calendar. And upcoming is the February 2nd seminar about postdoc in Sweden or abroad. So that was everything I had to present. So we can maybe stop the sharing and start with some questions.
Good. Thank you, Robert, for that presentation. We have a number of questions. I'll just start from the top and we'll see how far we get. In case a person started doing PhD under a residence permit for higher studies, is there any possibility to count this period towards permanent resident, or it won't be counted despite being employed?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, there is one case that is now a few years old where this was accepted for at least a shorter time when a person had a residence permit for studies that was not doctoral studies, and then but started doctoral studies during that time. I think it was a week or so that was counted, perhaps, but that was from the migration court in Luleå, and it has not been confirmed by the Court of Appeal. So it's I would assume that Migrationsverket will not count it regularly.
All right, thank you. Next question. I'll just read it out and we'll see how it gets.
Yeah.
To clarify, for a PhD student from outside the EU to get citizenship in Sweden, after 4 years, we can get permanent residence. And after 5 years with permanent residence, we can get citizenship? Question. So a total of 9 years to get citizenship? Is that correct?
No, it's 5 years, and you can count the same 4 years within the 5 years, so to say. So if you have received permanent residence after 4 years, then after another year, you can apply for citizenship when you have been here for 5 years. So it's not 9 years. Then,
Good.
of course, now it's discussed to, what you say, change the rules for citizenship and maybe have a longer qualification time. We will see. But as far as it is now, 5 years is enough.
Good. Thank you, Robert. The next one is, but how do you show that you can support your family as a PhD student? Does the 6,090 crowns demanded for each family member?
No, when it comes to permanent residency, it's enough if you can cover for yourself. You don't have to show that you can also cover for your family members. But of course, you might have to, in order for them to get residence permit, they also need to, you might have to cover for them. But for yourself, it's enough that you have this 6,090 crowns plus the housing cost. And if you share housing with someone, you can also split the housing cost in 2 pieces, no matter who pays what. So as far as we know, the income, the level of income is usually not a problem. What has been a problem is for how long you must have an income. And that's now clarified in this court decision.
All right, thank you, Robert. Does the rule of applying close to the end of the current residence permit also apply to the status of long-time resident application as it does to permanent residency?
No, you can apply at any time as soon as you have been here for 5 years with these types of residence permit that qualify for long-term residency. So that's an advantage compared to permanent residency, is that you can apply at any time, and even that's possible even if you automatically get permanent residency, which is perhaps quite interesting or funny, or how to see it, but it's possible.
All right, thank you. Next one. Can we apply for permanent residency after 44 months of having a residence permit like other work permit holders, or do we need to wait till 48 months, 4 years?
This is also a good question. I have tried to get a clear answer from Migrationsverket, and it's perhaps not very clear. This 44 months comes from, as far as I remember, comes from a court decision a few years ago, and so that's something you have to discuss with Migrationsverket. And it's also that it should be enough to have 4 years at the time when they take the decision, and not necessarily when you apply. But you should discuss this with Migrationsverket. And also remember that this is different from long-term residency when you must have fulfilled the qualification time already at the time for application, as this follows the EU directive.
All right, thank you. Since my residence permit is linked to my employment at the university, if we are having problems with my supervisor and want to quit my PhD, how long am I allowed to stay in Sweden until I find another PhD position?
Well, this is hard to say perhaps, but as long as you have applied for a new permit before the one you have runs out, you will be able to stay here. But of course, as soon as you get a decision, negative decision, you might have to leave. So this is a situation that you have to think about very carefully, I would say.
Right, thank you. Does seeking job visa 1 year considered as a gap in the duration? I don't understand. Permanent residence and citizenship, it says.
Well, depends what you mean with gap. It's for permanent residence, it's enough to have had residence permit for 4 years within 7 years. So in that case, a gap is not necessarily that problematic. For citizenship, it's also open question if this type of permit is qualifying or not, I would say. And the same if you have want to apply for long-term residency. Here, as I said, it's an opening if you have a legal stay, and this is, of course, a legal stay in terms of that it's not illegal, but if it's a legal stay in terms of long-term residency, that's another thing. So this is one thing that we have to sort of look closer into.
All right, thank you. Then there's a question about the presentation. I think can you share the judgment number? Do you have it available? I think, I don't know, slide 23, 24?
I think we have it at our webpage.
Okay.
When we presented the news about this.
Okay, I can find it and share the link. All right.
Yeah.
Next one then. When applying for either permanent or long-term residence, what is considered an interruption of stay in Sweden? In other words, what is the longest period that one can stay abroad and still qualify for being for permanent long-term residence only after 4 to 5 years?
Yeah, if we start with the rules for permanent residency as such, this is perhaps also one area that is a bit unclear, as it depends on the reason why you are abroad, or might depend on that at least. But to be on the safe side, you should not stay abroad more than 6 weeks per year, so like a normal vacation. But for example, if you work abroad, especially if you work for a Swedish university and you are posted abroad, that might be a specific situation. That's something that Migrationsverket is looking at right now, I learned today. So it's hard to answer. For long-term residency, it's easier because there is very strict. You can stay up to 10 months in total during the 5 years and not more than 6 months at a time. So that's the limit, but also then you know what is accepted or not.
All right. It seems that recently Migrationsverket doesn't accept unemployment benefit for long-term residency. Is that correct?
Yes, we have seen such information, and it's to me very unclear what they say here. And hopefully we will have a meeting with them on Wednesday, and then hopefully we will sort this out again. But as far as they have said so far, unemployment benefit will count. But the question is that they say that you must have it at the time when they take a decision, and not a possibility to get it in the future. That has not been accepted. But unemployment benefit as such will count. And that's at least what they have said before, and I have not heard anything else. But as you should be able to show that you have an income for about a year, it might be an issue of timing, as unemployment benefit will only last for 14 months at most if you do not have children under 18.
Thank you. Next one. Migrationsverket takes up to 6 months to process applications. During this time, we are allowed to legally stay in the country, but not leave, because we will not be allowed to re-enter without a valid permit. This causes problems for travel, both for work and personal reasons. Is there anything SULF can do about this? Can Migrationsverket be urged to give us a document that we are allowed to travel in and out of the country because the application is being processed?
Yes, that's one example of an issue that we have brought to politicians' attention, and we hope that this will be included in the inquiry that is supposed to start. This is a possibility since a few years ago, that if you have had a work permit before, you could get a document that allows you to re-enter Sweden, but it's not possible if you have had residence permit for studies or research. And we hope that this will be introduced. But as it is now, this is a very large problem.
Thank you.
Hopefully solved in the future, but not yet.
Next question. Why the insistence on income for long-term residency? Can savings well exceeding the income requirement not also be considered?
According to Migrationsverket, it cannot count. You can only count the income from those savings as such, so interest and so on that you get. But then you need quite a lot of money to cover for that. So that's what they have said. It should be an income from a work or company, unemployment benefit stipend, relative, but not savings as such.
All right, thank you. Can a doctoral candidate apply for a permanent residency 5 months before the current temporary residence permit expires in a case that the time until graduation is less than a year?
Migrationsverket says that as you cannot have 2 residence permits at the same time, you can only apply for permanent residency when the permit you have is about to run out, and they have said that you should not apply more than 14 days in advance, but you should also apply before it expires, so you have those 14 days. That's the window you have. The only exception could be if there is a reason to revoke the permit you have already. For example, if you are no longer a student and you have started some kind of work, but that is something you have to discuss with Migrationsverket.
Okay, thank you. If you get a job during the 1-year job seeking permit, do you have to leave Sweden to apply for a work permit?
Yeah, this is another interesting question that we also want this inquiry to address, because as it is now, it's fine to apply for a work permit from Sweden as long as it's not a work within research where you are expected to have a permit for research. So because then you have to leave and apply and come back again. But if you get any other type of job where you need sort of regular work permit, then it's fine to apply from Sweden. And it's also fine to apply for permanent residency during this year, but not, as I said, not for studies or research. That's a kind of a mistake, probably in the legislation process.
Next one. My partner is living and working in another EU country. Can he be my supporter in terms of long-term residency?
That was a difficult question to answer. The reason why you can count income from a relative is that's based on a judgment from the EU court when this was clarified. And in Sweden, it has been said that if you are married or living together, you are supposed to cover for each other. So that's why they count it. If you're not living together in Sweden, I cannot really for sure answer what will happen. So you should ask Migrationsverket about this.
For the long-term residency, can I apply while I still have a few months to meet the 5-year requirement? Since it will take more than those few months to have my application opened, and I would have met the requirement by the time opening of my application.
Well, I would not recommend this because it has been said that it's the time for the sort of the qualification time should be fulfilled when you apply, and that's also what you can see in the EU directive. So as far as we don't get any other information from Migrationsverket, I would not recommend to apply until you have been here for 5 years already.
Okay. Do we need to register to a health center when we arrive in Sweden?
Not necessarily. I think the easiest way to, if we for a while do not consider the specific situation for EU citizens, the easiest way to know is if you have a full personal number, you have access to healthcare without paying more than the basic fees. And that will be sorted out when you visit this health care. But of course, you can register with some healthcare provider, just as everyone can, if you want to belong to one specific unit, so to say. But it's not a requirement to get healthcare.
Same question. PhD started under the residence permit for higher studies. Can this period not be counted towards permanent residence, especially if registered with Skatteverket and covered by national health insurance throughout the period?
Yeah, that's, I think we answered that before, but the requirement is that you should have a residence permit for doctoral studies. So starting with another type of residence permit for other studies might not count, although there is at least one exception from court practice, as we know, but this is very unclear.
How are unemployment insurance payments coordinated with whatever benefits may come from Försäkringskassan?
If you are unemployed and receive unemployment benefits, you should inform A-kassan about any other compensation you get from Försäkringskassan or elsewhere, so they can make this coordination. And it's very important that you do this, because if you receive, for example, money from parental leave at the same time as you get unemployment insurance, you might not only have to return the money, you might also be excluded from A-kassan. So it's very important to inform them about all other payments. And of course, also all other work that you take, even very temporary work.
Thank you. Can we take parental leave during the weekend while we are on unemployment insurance from A-kassa?
I think it's possible to some extent, but it's very complicated. The rules are very complicated, so I would like that you ask A-kassan about this.
Good. After 5 years of PhD, my PhD had started 2019. If I want to apply for permanent residency, is having 1 year contract enough, or should I have a contract for 3 years?
Yeah, according to the new court decision, you should show that you have, or you are expected to have, an employment for at least a year at the time when they take the decision. So 1 year contract could be enough, might not even need 1 year, but if you have more than 1 year, you also allow them some handling time. And in that case, it might be very clear that you have an income for the coming year. So the longer contract you have, the better, of course. But the good thing with the new judgment is that one, it's not, you don't need more than 1 year. And number two is that they have to make an assessment if you will be able to get a new employment or an extended employment. And they will also look at your history to see if you have been able to have an employment for quite some time, it's more likely that you will have one in the future as well.
Okay. If a PhD student did not graduate before the contract and have sick leave during the PhD periods, does that influence applying for long-term permits and get unemployment insurance?
When it comes to qualification time for permanent residency, it's the time with residence permit that matters. So sick leave and leave for parental leave or so might not be any problem. But when they look at the future income, of course, that might be an issue. And to get unemployment insurance, that's, of course, you cannot get it, as I said before, at the same time as you get benefits for sickness. But if you have been sick and you are no longer sick and get unemployed, and then you might be able to get benefits based on the income you had before the sickness. But I would like you to ask those questions to our cousin, so you will get an answer from them.
Next one. What about a child born to a postdoc who is on researcher visa? Should they have to go out of Sweden?
Yeah, as it is now, this is unfortunately the case. And this is another issue that we have brought to the attention of this upcoming inquiry. And it's not only researchers, there are a few other groups that are affected by this, although not students actually, but others. So we hope that this will be solved. In some cases, Migrationsverket has been quite helpful, however, so you might only need to go to Finland for a day or so and apply from there. And this might be accepted. So that might be a solution, although it's not a perfect one.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the employment contract for permanent residents after PhD. Does it need to be in the academia again, or is it fine if you get the job employment contract outside the academia to apply for permanent residency?
It doesn't matter at all what type of job it is, as long as it's that it covers the income requirement the level 6,090 plus housing cost, and that it lasts or expected to last for a year or more. So that it could be any type of job.
Okay. Can the a-kassa unemployment be accounted as an income for the long-term resident permit? I heard some applicants got rejections lately. I think you covered this
earlier, we discussed
Robert.
this, and hopefully this will be clarified very soon.
Good. Next one. I'm applying for a cohabitant residence permit. Swedish partner. The immigration office has told me they could ask me to resign to my study residence permit, while it is not 100% sure they will give me the cohabitant permit. Is this too risky? Thanks a lot. Okay. Complicated.
Yeah, that's hard to say. It's based on individual situation, but yeah, in a way, it can be an advantage to have your own permit, and it might be a disadvantage. Depends on the situation. So it's hard to give any advice there.
If an industrial PhD student initially receives support from a company, but the company later stops providing support due to bankruptcy or financial issues, what happens to the student? Can the student continue their studies?
Well, basically, you always have the right to continue your studies at the university when you are accepted there as a doctoral student. But the problem is the financing, of course, and in such a situation, we would claim that the university has to take the responsibility and provide the financing, but this is perhaps a bit unclear. So So if this happens, I would recommend that you contact us if you are a member here.
Thank you. Am I allowed to stay in Sweden while my permit application is being processed, regardless of type of permit I have applied for? I think you covered this before, but
yeah, basically, as long as the permit you had before allowed you to take any job, you are still allowed to take any job during this time. And also if you applied before the permit ran out. If, of course, it's possible to apply for this permit from Sweden, which is often the case, but not always.
thank you. In an application for long-term residency, how can I prove the period I stayed abroad, 9 months of fieldwork, was part of my work contract? Would a letter from my employer be sufficient?
Well, when it comes to long-term residency, at least what we have learned from cases before is that it doesn't really matter why you stay abroad, as long as you stay abroad for more than 6 months at a time, or 10 months in total, you are sort of disqualified. So this is a problem as such. So we'll see. I should say that now it might be that the EU directive for long-term residency will be updated. There's an ongoing process about that. And there it's one proposal there is that you should be able to count time in different EU countries together. So that might help, but we are not there yet. And it will probably take some time before that is implemented.
If the extension permit application has been pending for 6 months and the consideration for permanent permits was added less than 1 month ago during the extension application process, can I ask to conclude the case?
Yeah. Hard to say. I mean, you can, of course, apply for conclusion of the case for the residence permit for studies, but for the permanent might be harder, but you have to ask Migrationsverket. I should though say that a residence permit for studies should be concluded within 90 days. And the residence permit for research should be concluded within 60 days, although we know that it's not always the case. But actually, that's part of the legislation, that's the maximum limit that Migrationsverket has to follow, unless there are very certain specific reasons.
When can we consider to apply? Can we exceed? I don't understand. Can we consider to apply for unemployment benefits before our PhD graduations?
In order to receive unemployment benefits, you are not allowed to be a student or doing studies. However, if you have left your thesis for printing and completed all courses, you might get benefits before the actual graduation. So ask A-kassan about this.
Here's a long question. I came here as a master student with 2 years residence in 2020. Then I got a PhD after 1 year, but I could not apply for PhD resident permits at the time. After finishing 2 years residence permit, Migrationsverket extended my residence permit for another 2 years, but did not give me any residence permits for PhD, as they said both residence permit and for higher studies. Now I have applied again for another 2 years extension. My PhD will be extended for another 3.5 years around. Can I apply for public permanent residency after finishing this time extension period? Okay, very complete, as there will be still 1.5 years left for my graduation and I should be eligible for permanent residency. Okay, do you get it, Robert?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but as we have said before, in general, residence permit for other studies than doctoral studies will not qualify. And then you might claim that this was some kind of a mistake or so. But basically, when it comes to rules, the same rules apply for any types of studies that at the university, no matter if it's doctoral studies or something else. But it's just that they mark the residence permits for doctoral studies specifically for that reason. And in some cases, for example, when you change from a work permit to a residence permit for studies, it's only possible to change to doctoral studies without leaving Sweden. So that's an example where the rules differ. But I say this because this is probably the reason why they say that you could stick with the permit you already had for other studies, because you're allowed to perform any type of studies.
Okay, thank you. I think you already answered the next one. Can you apply for 2 permits at the same time?
Depends what it is, but for example, if you have applied for permanent residency, you can mention that if that's not granted, that you would like something else, an extension for doctoral studies or research, or a new permit for research, or something else. So in that way, you can have 2 applications. And also, if you have an application for long-term residency, you can have one for residence permit at the same time. Or you should have, as I mentioned before, if it's a risk that the residence permit will run out.
Thank you. Next one is about previously answered question. I don't know if you remember that question, Robert. Should I look it up? We can go to the next one instead.
Yeah, 44 or 48 months. Well, I said that it's unclear. We have tried to get a clear answer from Migrationsverket, and it's not clarified yet if it's the same as for those with work permit.
Good, thank you. Can your partner apply for permanent residency after 4 years if fulfilling the requirements without the main applicant will be eligible for permanent residency after 4 years?
If you have a partner that has had a residence permit based on sort of your residence permit for doctoral studies, you must first get permanent residency before they can get permanent residency. And each individual must themselves fulfill the income requirement also when it comes to permanent residency. But if you're able to apply for long-term residency, you can count income from a relative. So it's important to note the difference between permanent residency and long-term residency.
Thank you. Then a question about A-kassa. I'm part of Kommunal's A-kassa, not Akademikernas A-kassa. Is there any drawback on that? I didn't know which would be better when I joined. I am unemployed and can't switch now.
Well, it might not be a big disadvantage. I mean, the rules for A-kassan, they are the same, no matter which A-kassa you belong to. But Akademikernas A-kassa has some advantages. One is that they have a low fee. Another one is that they know quite a lot about doctoral candidates and researchers and the situation there. And they also have short handling time. So, but apart from that, it's not a big issue.
Thank you. Can someone affiliate to SULF after PhD studies, but is not working as a teacher or researcher, if someone works in an industry, for example?
Well, we organize people that work or associated with universities and other research institutions within the sort of public sector. So if you work in the industry, then we would recommend another union that covers that organize people with your educational background.
Thank you. For applying PR, do you need an employment letter from a company, or if company offers a letter stating that we will hire the person after completing PhD will be enough?
According to this new judgment, I would say it's quite possible that if you have an employment now and you have some kind of promise or even better signed contract with a new employer, that should definitely count.
When one is required to apply to, or wait from outside of Sweden, can one wait in another EU or Nordic country?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this, that in some cases Migrationsverket has accepted that you take your child to Finland, for example, and apply while you are there, and perhaps also if you must change residence permit from this permit to as a job seeker to permit for research, for example. So you can ask them, absolutely, as long as you are allowed to travel to the other country. But the problem is, if you don't have any residence permit at all, it's you have to wait until you can return and so on. So you have to look at this, but it has been possible.
Okay. My residence permit will end in 3 years and 6 months, but I will have my PhD position for 5 years. Can I apply after 3 years, 6 months for the permanent residence permit, as I will have the contract for more than 1 year after the 4 years? And when will they handle my case, or when will they handle my case?
Yeah, well, at the time when the residence permit is about to run out, you have a possibility to apply for permanent residency. So that's absolutely possible, I would say. But the risk is that if they will take a decision before you have had 4 years, and in this case, to get 4 years, you must first get an extension and then get the permanent. So it's a bit tricky. It's easier if you have already 4 years at the time you apply. So this could be problematic. But if you apply for permanent residency and you are still a doctoral candidate, they will always look at the possibility to extend the residence permit for studies. But the handling time might be longer if you first apply for permanent residency.
Is it possible to start a second PhD after finishing the first one in Sweden, to get a dual PhD?
Yeah, this is an interesting question that we have encountered a few times. And yes, it might be possible, at least if the new PhD is in a different subject than the first one. Then there has been a question, can you be employed again for another 4 years when you have already had an employment? So that's, well, these are tricky questions that might not have a very clear answer. In one case that I remember, it actually ended up that the person got a permanent job for the second period, because it was concluded that they did not have the possibility to offer employment as doctor candidate for another 4 years. But that was PhD. I think it was 2 PhD exams for the same university at that time, but in different subjects.
Okay, so not that easy. If I am a postdoctoral researcher on stipend, should I change my residence permit if I want to change job to another type of job or industry? And is it possible to apply for it from Sweden?
Yes, if as a residence permit for research is connected to a specific employer or university, and for that specific reason, that then you should apply for a new permit if you change job, and it's absolutely possible to do it from Sweden. You can always, I should say, go from a residence permit for studies or research to work, and nowadays also the other way around. So that is something that has improved the last years.
I have a residence permit connected to a job as an adjunct. I will soon start PhD studies. Do I need to apply for a new residence permit, or even though my current permit is not expiring? Could this affect traveling out of the country before I receive a decision? Could this affect my wife's ongoing residence permit applications? Many questions there in one.
Yeah, I think you have to ask Migrationsverket, but if it's a permanent employment as teacher, which mainly includes teaching, I would assume that you have residence permit for work, and it's not forbidden to study when you have residence permit for work. So it might be possible. It might be different if you get a new employment as doctor candidate, but so ask Migrationsverket how they want to handle this.
I got a PhD position after I applied for a job seeking permit and waiting the decision for 9 months. Can I apply for permanent residence when I finalize my 3rd year? Then it becomes 4 years in total.
Well, you need 4 years with residence permit for studies, research, or doctoral studies, research, or work, and the job seeking permit as such will not qualify for permanent residency. So I guess you will have to wait until you get a new permit and then apply when that is about to run out, or try to apply for long-term residency after 5 years and hope that the job seeking permit will also count there.
I think this one has been covered before. As a postdoc, if I apply for a new permit for a job in industry before the ending of my postdoctoral permit, will I lose my first residence permit if I don't get the other one?
Well, no, you will not lose it as long as you still continue your research. If you just apply for a new job, but in order to apply for a permit for a new job, I guess you must first have got it, and the new employer should initiate such a process. So
the next one is
in general, it's important to always fulfill the requirement for the permit you have. So if you have a permit for doctoral studies, you should perform doctoral studies. If you have a permit for research, you should do research. Otherwise, the time might not count when you later apply for permanent residence.
Good, thank you. Now we just have 3 questions left and 3 minutes. Can we do it, Robert?
Yes, hopefully.
If the application is done online, why does it matter if it's from outside of Sweden? How is it checked? Good question.
Yeah, I don't know actually, but
IP addresses, I don't know.
Yeah.
Next one. While we have applied for long-term residency, can we apply for permanent residency as well? Or can we apply for temporary residency?
You can apply for both, I would say. But then if it's, well, and you should apply for some kind of residence permit, as I said, even if you apply for long-term residency, in case you might end up without a residence permit. But then if it's an idea to apply for also for permanent residency, that depends on the situation.
Will the PR get approved if I got a position in the industry and stopped PhD after 4 years of PhD studies? You have talked about that.
Well, yes, as there is no requirement to have an exam to apply for permanent residency, it can be possible if you have had residence permit for 4 years at the time.
To the question on how it's checked when you apply online either way, maybe because we have to submit fingerprints in person.
Yeah,
but
could be. I actually don't know how much they investigate this.
No. Okay, today's last question then, and we still have 2 minutes. Yeah. Last one, hopefully. If I apply for a residence permit along with a permanent residence, at the former is granted before the latter, would it be required to apply again for the permanent residence at the end of the new residence permit?
Yeah, it might be. I mean, normally if you apply for permanent residency and you have something else as second-hand choice, then they will, if they might grant permanent residency first, but in which order they do this is another issue that can be discussed.
Okay, and now the very last one, 1321. Does paternal benefit considered as income when we apply for long-term residence?
Yes, that should be, you should be able to count that. The only benefit that cannot count is those that is what you say, based on the fact that you have a very low income or very, well, you don't have much money. I mean, what is called in Swedish försörjningsstöd or something like that, or housing allowance, bostadsbidrag, but every benefit that is paid to you with no matter what economy you have, that they should be counted.
Thank you. And with that, I think we will finish this webinar. And thank you all for attending. And thank you, Robert, for clarifying on this somehow complicated matter. And for you who are not yet members of SULF, please remember that we have a great offer for doctoral candidates for the 3 months for free. And you will find information on the SULF website about this. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.